Crinolines. The crinoline, also known as the hoop skirt, was a bell-shaped device that pushed the volume of skirts to an extreme degree. Worn in the 1800s by Victorian women, crinolines were originally petticoats made of linen, stiffened with horsehair. Later, the invention of the steel cage crinoline offered the same voluminous look without the extra heat and bulk of thick petticoats. These undergarments were dangerous. In 1858, a young woman in Boston died when her large skirt caught the embers from the fireplace in her parlour and went up in flames. 19 such deaths occurred in a 2-month period. Bombasts. The exaggerated body stiffening known as bombasts was popular with both women and men in the 16th century. Cotton wool or even sawdust was used to add volume to areas of clothing, particularly the sleeves. Men sometimes filled their doublets to give the illusion of a fuller belly or padded their calves to look more masculine. Lotus shoes. Lotus shoes were worn by Chinese girls with bound feet. For centuries, families repeatedly broke and folded the feet of their young daughters to create tiny feet that epitomized femininity. The foot was bound with long ribbons to prevent growth. If the toes withered and fell off, even better. The process usually took between 2 to 3 years, and the girl's feet were bound for the rest of her life. Women with bound feet wore lotus shoes, cone or sheath-shaped footwear that resembled a lotus bud. The shoes were made of silk or cotton and were usually ornate, embroidered with flowers, animals, and other traditional patterns. There were many attempts to ban foot binding throughout history. It was officially outlawed in 1912, though the practice was still carried out in secret in some areas of China. Bleods. In the 12th century, European men and women wore this ornate garment with floor-length sleeves. The Bliauts or Bleod is a word from Old French with Germanic origins and is the root word of the modern word blouse. The Bliauts' most notable features were its extremely long sleeves, which looked dramatic but likely hindered movement. Most Bleods were made of wool, but silk was also a favourite fabric, especially for the rich. The garment's exact origin isn't known, but historians think it made its way to Europe during the Crusades. Breast flatteners. During the Roaring Twenties, the hourglass shape gave way to the boyish flapper figure and underwear got an overhaul. The goal of every undergarment was to flatten the breast and torso so the flapper dresses could hang straight down without any curvaceous interruptions. Corset makers R and W H Symington invented a garment, the Symington side lacer, that would flatten the breasts. The wearer would slip the garment over her head and pull the straps and side laces tight to smooth out curves. Other manufacturers designed similar devices. The miracle-reducing rubber brassiere was scientifically designed, without bones or lacing, while the Bramley Corsel combined the brassiere and corset into one piece that easily laid under dresses. Now, I was the first girl to develop in my year of over 300 children, so I know how painful it is to flatten them down. It's embarrassing to say this. I used to go to great lengths to try and fit in, look more like my friends. Now this is a pretty embarrassing photo of me at the age of 12 showing a pendant that I found. This was just about the time I started to try and flatten everything. If there are any young girls watching, please don't be ashamed and think you need to hide. Be proud of who you are and don't let nasty comments put you down. Chopines. In the 16th century, noble ladies were mad for their extreme platform shoes. They were made from mostly wood or cork, covered in leather, brocade or jewel embroidered velvet. These shoes were worn as a sign of one's social status. The higher the shoes, the higher the standing. They made the wearer wobbly on their feet. Women would sometimes require assistance to venture out in their extra tall shoes. Cod pieces. 15th and 16th century men sought to accentuate their packages with cod pieces. They were often made of padded cloth or embroidered fabric, though metal cod pieces were also worn, held in place with buttons, strings or ties. The cod piece was designed to draw praise and raise a man's profile. Even the name was knowingly bold, as cod was slang for scrotum. A French philosopher wasn't having it, calling out the hypocrisy of the device. In the 1580s, he deemed the codpiece an empty, useless model of a member that we cannot even decidedly mention by name, which however we show off and parade in public. They eventually fell out of fashion as doublet styles changed and breeches became more billowing. Bloomer suits. Newspaper editor and temperance advocate Amelia Bloom helped start a wave of more practical, less constricting clothing in the 1850s. Her temperance newspaper, The Lily, became the place where she and writer and activist Elizabeth Smith Miller promoted the bloomer suit, consisting of trousers under a knee-high skirt with a vest. The bloomer suit caught on with temperance activists and other like-minded women, causing a major sensation. Women who wore bloomer suits were frequently harassed as the outfit was deemed scandalous. Many in the press and society lamented that the bloomer suit robbed a woman of her mystery by revealing too much. It was eventually ridiculed back into the wardrobe, but not before making a mark on fashion. Hubble skirts. In the 1910s, French designer Paul Perrault, dubbed the King of Fashion in America, debuted the Hubble Skirt. The long, close-fitting skirt forced women to adopt mincing tiny steps. True, the design liberated women from heavy petticoats and constricting corsets. But, as the designer said, yes, I freed the bust, but I shackled the legs. Stiff starched collars. These detachable collars were most popular in the 19th century, and they could be deadly, starched to the point of being nearly unbendable and attached with a singular pair of studs. The collar could slowly asphyxiate men, particularly if they fell asleep or passed out while drinking. Another dangerous aspect of the collar was its pointed corners. These collars were so lethal that they were known as the father killer. Muslin dresses. Popularised by Marie Antoinette, the muslin dress was sheer and quite risque for the time. It embodied a new age of French court, where women showed off more skin but it was dangerous to wear in the dead of winter since the thin fabric offered little insulation. Rumour had it that some women even wet down their dresses with perfumes or water to show off their figures, further exposing themselves to the elements. Some historians believe the muslin dress led to the 1803 influenza outbreak in Paris. Many women died of the so-called muslin disease. Crakows. The super long shoe reigned supreme with men across Europe in the late 14th century. They were introduced to the English by the Polish nobles. Once the shoe was seen at court, they became all the rage, even though the shoes were 6 to 24 inches long, but they were a quick indicator of social status. The longer the shoe, the higher the wearer's station. Chains were sometimes strung from the toe to the knee to allow the wearer to walk. Sometimes the toes were stiffened with material for the same reason. They were considered ridiculous, vain and dangerous by conservatives and church leaders, who called them the devil's fingers. Bustles, also known as the Grecian bend. The earliest version of this trend simply featured excess fabric gathered and draped at the back of the dress. Eventually, those skirts were puffed up with large cushions filled with straw. Ladies who wore them ended up with exaggerated figures and outthrust bottoms. The bustle was frequently a target of ridicule. In 1868, Laura Redden Searing, using the pen name Howard Glendon, wrote about the agony young women put themselves through for fashion. If you knew the Spartan courage which is required to go through an ordeal of this sort, 2 or 3 hours at a time, you would not wonder that she has not an idea left in her head after the daily display is over. Panniers. They were popular in the 17th and 18th century. The boxed petticoat expanded the width of skirts and dresses and stood out on either side of the waistline. They varied in size and were made of whalebone, wood, metal, and sometimes reeds. Extremely large panniers were worn mostly on special occasions and reflected the wearer's social status. 2 noble women, however, couldn't walk through an entrance at the same time or sit in a coach together. The device was also uncomfortable, limiting movement and activity. The expensive pannier sparked ridicule. A satirical artist in the Gentleman's Magazine, written in 1750, portrayed women as being sick of the burden of the style. We pass along, as it were, balancing between 2 scales. Every person we meet, every post we pass, and every corner we turn encumber our way and obstruct our progress. We fit in a chair like a swan with the head between our lifted wings. The whole side of a coach is hardly spacious enough for one of us. A passage read. Macaroni. In the 1870s, aristocratic British men donned large wigs with a small hat of feather at the top. The young men who took up the fashion trend reportedly brought it back from their grand tours across continental Europe, in which they intended to deepen cultural knowledge. The style is, in fact, named after the Italian pasta dish, signifying sophistication and worldliness. Corsets. Corsets have been around in one form or another since the 5th century. They were originally made of stiffened fabric and then evolved into cage-like contraptions made from whalebone, wood or steel. Corsets caused organs to shift around There's a lot of misinformation about the corset. Most people today think corsets were extremely dangerous and caused all kinds of health problems, and that's quite inaccurate. Most of the diseases that have been credited to corsets in fact had other causes. Corsets did not cause scoliosis, the crushing of the liver, cancer or tuberculosis. It doesn't mean that corsets were without any health problems, but it does mean that most modern people are wildly naive in believing the most absurd medical accusations about corsetry, said Valerie Steele, the director and chief curator of the Museum of the Fashion Institute of Technology. Arsenic dresses. Bottle green dresses were all the rage in the Victorian era, and they had price tags to match. To achieve this lovely green shade, the fabric was dyed using large amounts of arsenic. Some women suffered nausea, impaired vision, and skin reactions to the dye, but the dresses were only worn on special occasions, limiting exposure to the arsenic in the fabric. The garment makers were the real sufferers. Many died to bring this trend to the fashionable set. And this concludes the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe for future videos. Thank you.